Hello, hello. All right. We should be in the Gospel of Mark. I'm pretty sure we're in chapter 3. Okay. So, we're going to start in verse 20 today. It says, "Then the multitude came together again, so that they could not so much as eat bread." And so we talked about this at the beginning of yesterday's message, where it's just things got so crazy. People came from all over, backing up like verse 7 and 8, about from Idumea, Jerusalem, Jordan, Tyre, Sidon. So from all the surrounding areas, people were coming. And they're saying, like, we can't even eat. It's just so busy. It kind of reminds me of the episode of The Chosen. You know, and every now and then that show has got some really good nuggets. Every now and then it's meh. Every now and then it's really good. It just kind of depends, you know, like every show. But there's the episode where it pretty much only shows the disciples the entire episode, season 2 somewhere. And they're, you know Jesus is healing people, and the disciples are like rotating, kind of managing the mob. So that's kind of what reminds me of this text here. And you see lines of people wanting to meet with Jesus. And the disciples are keeping, but for the most part, they're rotating their shifts. And by the end of the show, the disciples are bickering with each other, and they're fighting with each other on who has the better plan and what's best for Jesus. And we got to watch out for him, and we got to take care of these people. We got to, well, who invited you anyway? And all this bickering happens. And then finally, with the dark night around the campfire, you finally see Jesus at the very last minutes of the episode walking, and he's like limping with exhaustion, because all he's been doing all day is serving people and healing people and ministering to people. And, it's that sobering aha moment where these disciples are bickering and fighting. And then you find Jesus, who's just been serving. And he's exhausted from serving, but he's not complaining. No, he's just knows that that's what God has called him to do. He's called him to serve. He's not complaining about how tired he is. He's not complaining about how the disciples were slacking off. He's just doing what he does, serving the Lord through serving people. And so it talks here about how the multitude came together. They could not even so much as eat bread because it was just so crowded. Verse 21, "But when his own people heard about this, they went out to lay hold of him, for they said, he is out of his mind." So again, Jesus is just serving. And so people are finally like, man, we need to help Jesus. And ain't that the case? Oftentimes people feel like Jesus needs our help rather than us needing Jesus's help. So we're gonna come up with a better plan for you, Jesus. "And the scribes who came down from Jerusalem said, he has Beelzebub, and by the ruler of the demons he casts out demons. So he called them to himself and said in parables, how can Satan cast out Satan? If a kingdom is divided against itself, that kingdom cannot stand. If a house is divided against itself, that house cannot stand. And if Satan has risen up against himself and is divided, he cannot stand, but has an end. No one can enter a strong man's house and plunder his goods unless he first binds the strong man, and then he will plunder his house." And so Jesus is just saying how silly of an idea this is, that because they can tell there's something supernatural, right? They can tell that Jesus has supernatural power, but of course, supernatural power can only come from one place. Can only come from one of two places. It can come from above, or it can come from below. Really, that's the end of it all. There are supernatural forces in the world, and they can be accessed from above and from below. I think it's worth noting that, witchcraft and demonic practices are not without power. It's not like people, we believe in God and God's the only one who gives power and therefore everything else is a phony. Well, that's not true. There are spiritual forces, there are demons, fallen angels, wicked spiritual hosts, and they have the power to do stuff. They don't have the power of God. but they have the power to do stuff. And people who seek them and seek that power, they get access to that power. That's kind of the idea. So the idea that someone would do miraculous feats by the power of demons, well, that wasn't unusual. See, the scribes and Pharisees, that wasn't something that they considered odd. I'm sure they had seen it. They've seen paganism, spiritual warfare, and they've seen these types of miraculous things take place. But Jesus brings up the point, but why would Satan be casting out his own demons? And so the main point Jesus is just making is how illogical their argument is that by demonic forces, he's casting out demons. But the Pharisees didn't want to acknowledge the only alternative, that it's by the power of God that Jesus was doing these miracles. I've said it once, I'll say it again. That quite often people feel very strongly that their ministry or the ministry that they support is authentic because of all the powers, signs, and wonders that are seen coming through their ministry. But we need to remember that the very deception of the end times through the Antichrist, which I don't think we're seeing him yet, but the spirit of Antichrist, the demonic powers that empower him, they're around. He, right, is there empowered by powers, signs, and lying wonders. We read in 2 Thessalonians 2. We read in Revelation 13 about a false prophet who great signs and wonders. He's going to do some crazy stuff. And it's going to draw people to Satan. You know, it's interesting debating what the lie is. In multiple places, there's reference to the lie. And we read about the Antichrist deceiving people with the lie. And I think one great potential example to that is the lie that Satan is the equal and opposite to God. And that Satan is powerful enough to overcome God. And so that's something that we need to keep our eyes out for, is the fact that people think miracles validate, and they can, but they also can just validate that it's supernatural. But where is that power coming from? And so Jesus says, no one can enter a strong man's house and plunder his goods unless he binds a strong man, and then he'll plunder his house. And so he's just talking about, he's like, if you're going to really bind Satan, you have to go for Satan. You can't use, Satan's not going to use himself to attack himself. And so, I'm just debating if I keep going or just save that stuff for tomorrow. We'll save that stuff for tomorrow. And so, yeah, this idea of spiritual warfare, I think it's a very real thing. In fact, it's been my kind of pet subject for the last few weeks. Been reading lots of good books. And, you know, I think it is something that in Jesus' time, people were more aware of what was going on. People were paying attention more, and people were more accepting to the idea of spiritual warfare, of demonic powers and angelic powers, both being highly involved in this battle and struggle we're all involved in. And so I'm hoping coming up in a matter of weeks, I'll say, to do a special Sunday night message where we just talk about spiritual warfare, because I think that's the biggest thing, is that we read about wrestling not against flesh and blood. We read about all these verses that talk about spiritual warfare and the role of demons and angels and God and spiritual powers. And I would say that many churches do kind of look past it, and they're probably missing out on a lot of freedom and a lot of experiential difference in their Christian walk, because they really do just fight the battles in the flesh, and they're not looking at the spiritual stuff that's going on behind. And I think one of Satan's greatest tactics, especially in the church in America, is being supernaturally natural. He's not using things that are blatantly supernatural, because that would bring you to the spiritual battlefield, fighting the supernatural battle. But when he attacks people supernaturally, by natural means, natural deceptions, simple lies and deceptions, he can do a whole lot of damage to a Christian simply by getting them to believe something that's not true or biblical. And I'm not talking even about false doctrine. That's like going even further down the line. I'm talking about simple things, like the lies of your forgiveness, the lies about your acceptance, the lies about God's heart and love towards you. If Satan can get you guys to believe that, he's got you right where he wants you. And so I'll give last but not least a sneak peek on one of my conclusions. Possession, demonic possession, where a believer is controlled from the inside out, or a person, I should say, a person is controlled from the inside out. Even if that's not possible, for a Christian, I sometimes think we overlook how much control, how much really domineering control can be done from the outside in. And so, I have a good example I want to share, but maybe I'll just save it for when I do that special message. But it is amazing on how much control can be done from the outside in. You don't have to enter in to be able to have a whole lot of power over someone. So, all that said, Jesus didn't cast out demons by the power of demons. He did it by the power of God. There is supernatural power in this world, and it comes from one of two places, from above or below. We shouldn't turn a blind eye to it. We should make ourselves familiar, because as Paul says, we're not ignorant of Satan's devices. And I always feel just a little awkward reading and saying that, because sometimes I feel a little ignorant of Satan's devices. And maybe as a Christian, I should familiarize myself with them so that I can agree with Paul and say, I'm not ignorant of Satan's devices. So hopefully we'll be accomplishing that on a Sunday night soon. All right, you guys take care. Have a great day. And I will see you guys tomorrow morning and talk about the unpardonable sin. Adios.